Momodo.
I don't know what that means. Let's roll. Hello, everybody. Good evening.
Hello.
And welcome to an episode of Benny's Big Talk with my friend, Zach.
I'm your friend?
No.
This
is for show business, bro.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's facsimile. All right.
Exactly. It's all about the presentation, man, all right? But after we finish this episode, I'm going to kick you out of my house. We're never going to talk again.
Agreeable.
I'm using you for content, actually.
Just like everybody else.
Yeah, hey, man. I'm extracting surplus value from you to fuel my capitalist endeavors.
And I signed up for that. Let's go.
Yeah, how do you feel about that, man? All right.
I'm happy to be a cog in the machine.
Aren't we all, man? We're all clockwork oranges, man. But it's okay. You know, we get benefits from it, right?
Do we?
Yeah. Look at all this cut that. All right. So okay, Zach.
Yeah.
We had so you actually came a little prepared for this podcast.
A little bit.
And you had some things you wanted to talk about. And I like them so much so that I decided, for the benefit of the talk, that I should be lazy this time.
Benefit.
Yes, I'm always talking about those benefits, bro, man. You know,
Bengineer.
benefit this in your ass, bro.
Oh,
Anyways,
there you
we're
go.
gonna cut that one.
Yeah, I think that's got to be beeped, huh? I was trying to avoid triggering that.
Came to the wrong show, bro.
Yeah.
Are video games arts?
Hot take.
All right,
Absolutely.
they are. I think that they have the potential to be art, and that a few games have proven themselves to be art. But I will start from the alternative view from this, only because, although I do think they can be, I think that it's a very, very early fledgling art, kind of like early cinema before it really kind of consummated into what it became. And I think that there's some interesting points, like, to the contrary. Like, do you know the film reviewer Roger Ebert?
Yep.
So have you heard his take on why video games aren't art?
I feel like I heard it a long time ago, but it
was interesting. I mean, it was like, he's dead now, but this was like 15 years ago or something like that. And so he was asked this question. Of course, he's been a film reviewer since like the 1960s and 70s. And so he's obviously an older person. And so the concept of video games is a newer thing to him. But he posited this thing where he was like, okay, a video game is basically like a digital elevated version of like chess or checkers. It's a game. And games aren't considered arts, even though the stakes are very high. You know, I mean, there's quite a lot of skill and arts involved in them, but he doesn't consider themselves to be arts. And he considers games to just be like kind of a more complicated modern version of a chess game. And so he thinks that as long as the art is something that can be manipulated and the objective is more like competition or winning, that it's not arts because it's not meant to be seen as an object that produces emotion or something like that, right? And especially the fact that you can manipulate the game, he thinks. But this, I think, is a failure because it merely looks at games as like, okay, it's not a movie. Because he says that because the gamer can manipulate the environment of the game, like change, you know, like turn around, you know, and change things, and therefore it can't be art because like the player is contributing to the art of the game and changing it, and therefore you don't have like an intact artistic vision. But what do you think about that?
I think that is the artistic vision. I recently listened to an old talk by the quest writer for Fallout and Skyrim and stuff like that. The guy who did the Dark Brotherhood quest line. The name is escaping me now. But his whole thing was, we wanted to write the great American novel, the next great American novel, but you know that player agency exists, and some people are going to take your novel, rip all the pages out, make paper planes out of them. It's like, but you still got to write it anyway. Like, the simple fact that the player agency exists is part of the artistic expression because it's made with that in mind.
And that's the unique part about games, I think, is the player agency. Like I think of like how Martin Scorsese once said that with film, The only unique art of film is the editing, and everything else is just like something that existed beforehand. You know, like there's theater, acting, there's camera, there's cinematography, there's film and photography arts, and then there's music, and all these things combine into making a film. But the only thing that's unique to film is the editing, right? And that's the process that makes it separate, and you can make true art out of that has never been a thing before.
Yeah.
But with video games, I think it is in the player agency and the way that you can play with that. And I always look at things like Bioshock is a great first example. Like, do you remember the concept of ludonarrative dissonance?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So we'll define it for the viewers here. Basically, the idea is that your actions as the player can be very different from the story that you are ostensibly participating in the game, right? So like, let's say like there's a game where you're a hero, but you can also massacre thousands of people, and then in the cutscenes, you're blood free and very noble, right? But you can murder civilians, etc. But then nothing ever happens after that. There's a difference between the things you can do because they want to make it like a fun, interactive experience where it has lots of possibilities, but then they want to give you a directed narrative, and they can't really like assume the way you're going to behave. And sometimes they actually want to do the opposite, and in the case of Bioshock, like, the story around like the kind of dissonance in that game.
You talking about like the little sisters and that whole thing? Okay.
Well, basically, it's like the city is supposed to be an unbridled capitalist utopia, and you arrive in the city kind of accidentally, theoretically, and then you start kind of seeing these different factions who are trying to take the city apart, because basically they invented these drugs that make you super powerful, and these super drugs kind of turned everyone into psychopaths, and now there's all these different warring factions. The place has gone to hell. Yeah. But like, you're talking to this guy, and he keeps telling you to do these things. He wants to free the city from its hyper capitalist overlord who allowed it to become this maniacal place. And so you think you're like, oh, I'm gonna fix this place. I'm gonna heal it, from this just insanity that it's under. You think that you're doing good the whole time, right? But he keeps using this phrase. He keeps saying, hey, would you kindly go over that door, and would you kindly do this? And you're thinking like, well, he's just Irish. That's just what they say.
Spoilers for
everybody. It was 15 years ago, but 20 years ago almost. Yeah. It's we're old.
Yeah, we're old.
But turns out that's a trigger phrase, and he's just been making you do a bunch of shit this whole game, and actually you've been under the kind of like hypnotic spell of the capitalist overlord of this city, and he's been making you kind of do his bidding to get rid of the heads of these factions that are trying to kill him. And so this whole time you're thinking, oh, I've been doing good, but in the end you have actually just been doing the bidding of someone else, and you thought, oh, well, because I'm playing a game, I'm supposed to do what this guy tells me.
Yeah.
But like,
you don't really have an option anyway.
Yeah. And so really they played with the idea of player choice, and that was where it became fascinating. And I think that was an early case of games becoming art.
You brought up chess, for instance. Yeah. There, to me at least, which artist seems to be entirely interpretation, that the mental dance between two people, even if it's Pong, like the actual mechanical movings of these parts and pieces and the two people having this conflict is in itself an art form. So like chess, like I don't know how to play chess, but I understand the concepts and how many different ways, even it's what's called a perfect knowledge game, right? You look at the board and you know everything that every piece can do, but you have no idea what this other person is going to be able to do with their pieces. And there's all these gambits and strategies.
So there's already that interactivity built into it.
Yeah. I think the competition itself is artful. The things that a person is capable of doing and way they can move these pieces is unique to each person. And you can teach other people these same strategies, but the way they employ them and the way they attempt to outsmart their opponent and things like that, to me, seems like an art form.
That is an art.
Yeah.
And I think the very idea of trying to define what art is just an arrogance. Yeah. It's an arrogant notion, because there is an art to chess. There's an art to any human endeavor that you can devote your energies to. I mean, think about things like performance art, which I don't think that's, Roger Ebert would ever like deign to say is not art, but it is an interactive art. Like when what's her name, Marina Abramovic. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but she did this art piece back in the '70s where she basically stood in a public forum, put out a bunch of weapons in front of her, and said, "Just do whatever you want to me for 24 hours, and I won't move or resist or anything." And this was in attempts to see kind of, the depth of human depravity when given the opportunity. And so people, they fucked with her. They ripped her clothes off. They sliced her. They held a gun to her head.
They fairly recently?
No, it was like 40 years ago.
Oh, but I feel like somebody recently
it's been in the public
similar.
consciousness, and I'm sure people have done imitative iterations of that, but it was kind of a landmark piece of the time. And people often poo-poo shit like that. They say, well, how was that art? Like there was, like say the guy who put a duct taped a banana to the wall at the Met or something like that. I don't know if it was at the Met, but yeah, that was an art piece. And then someone ate the banana or whatever. It's just, who are you to define arts? And we've gotten to a point where, okay, yes, people are like, okay, well, the peak of arts is Michelangelo's David, or the peak of arts is a fully realistic painting, maybe something by Jacques-Louis David or something from the 1800s, But when they realize they hit the peak of realism, they're like, where can we go from there? Because we made a painting where someone looks exactly like a real person, but like, okay, is that the peak of art? And then we had to start deconstructing it. So just defining art, I think, is a failure of perspective.
Yeah, I think you already hit on it, that it's something, it's whatever makes you feel something.
Yeah.
And that can be anything. And I don't know about you, but watching high level performance of anything, like whether it's athletic or anything competitive, it can make you feel things.
Yeah.
People get crazy over soccer, football, whatever. And the emotions that it brings out, you could consider that an art form.
Yeah.
And I mean, fighting games, right? Watching high level, it's similar
massacring people, with axes.
Yes.
It's an art.
It can be. It's similar to chess in that way, where it's two people performing at a level that you probably couldn't comprehend or do yourself, and there's this mental dance that has to happen. I like the word dance for this because it's not just guys hitting buttons and throwing out fireballs. I know everything that this character can do in this situation, and I can try to force this guy to do this thing, and then what's he going to do in response to what I'm doing. And to some people, it's you're just hitting buttons and playing video games. But when they're competing at these high levels, even without stakes, even when it's just two people sitting on the couch, it's still, it can make you feel things. It brings out emotion. It brings out, and it bonds people. It can damage relationship. It does all that, they talk about Mario Party ruining, family and friendships, much like Monopoly. But
well, so it is even the physical arts, like even sports. I mean, that is absolutely an art. Like I think of, like Socrates was quoted as saying something to the effect of, it's a shame for people for a man to grow old before he's able to witness the beauty and grace and poetry of what his body is capable of, which basically means like, when you're young, you should try and be fit so you can kind of like, move gracefully and do great things with your body, right? And so in that sense, he recognized, and I don't know how good the translation is, from archaic Greek, but like the poetry of movements, like the beautiful grace that a sportsman is able to achieve, with their skill and like years of dedication, that is an art. But I think that the distinctive thing about video games in art is that I think what you have to say is that not that they can't be art, because they're obviously a form of art, but to what point have they developed themselves as a unique form of art that can be given stance among the other great arts? And, and I think that the best thing to define it is that interactivity. Because like a game can be beautiful. A game can look like a painting. Red Dead Redemption 2 looks gorgeous, but it's in that sense, it's just imitative of other existing art forms. But I think that for games to become an art form, and I think they're there in its early fledgling stages, it's growing, but it's not quite hit its peak as a full art.
Yeah.
But the issue is that it's been so co-opted by money now because of how expensive it is to make games.
Like any good art form does.
Exactly. But I think to this extent, games are so much more extremely associated with money because of the expenses involved in creating them.
Yeah.
But they make more money than every other entertainment industry combined.
Yeah.
And so I think that money has kind of infected the gaming industry and it has turned it into almost an entirely extractive, profit-based industry that doesn't really seek art in the way that we'd like it to. But that's my own thinking about it. What do you think?
When you scroll further down on the Steam page and you find some of these more indie or double A, as they can be called, you still find that people are self-publishing their own work. They're working for 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 years on a single project.
Constantly.
Hard work. And some people they have to have all of these different skills. You don't have a team of 300 people where each person is hyper specific on what they do. This guy's got to code. He's got to do the sprite work, the music, all of that stuff. And he's got to play test his own stuff. It's not something that's easy to do. And you don't just wake up one morning and pick it up and do it perfectly. And there's still art being made there. I think there's still lots of stuff that when you dig a little further, the money isn't like you've Kickstarter and stuff like that, where people are being funded by the community to make things without that oversight. So obviously with things like the AAA industry, or even now we're talking about quadruple A, when you get your God of Wars and your Call of Duties and your Assassin's Creed,
soon to be $100 a pop.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks, Rockstar.
I'm out on that. It's promoting certain other let's say more nautical approaches to acquiring content.
Shiver me timbers.
That's entirely on them. They're making it that way. But when you have even smaller collaborative efforts have a sense of artistry and love. Like, okay, so we talked last time we were hanging out at the party. You mentioned the Oblivion remaster because you weren't sold on it. It felt like a cash grab or something. And I completely understand that. But as somebody who's now acquired it and put some time into it, these remasters are usually exactly cash grabs. Like a lot of people say Last of Us is a fantastic game, but they remastered it after only like 3 or 4 years just to bump it up to a new console. That was a cash grab. Oblivion Remastered being made by a team of people who grew up playing Oblivion. And you can tell by the way that the game has been altered, or the coats of paint and where they've been put, that there was love, intention, and passion put into it.
No, I'd like to comment on that, because I did say it was a cash grab, but I think that it's not quite so simple to say that. I would say that from Bethesda's perspective, not the company, I can't recall their name. It's going to go right here. Virtuous, is that what it was? Yeah, it was a French company, I believe. And they, not to say that they did not make it with passion, because they were contracted out by Bethesda to create that remaster, and they did it with absolute love, and they absolutely grew up playing that just like I did. And they put so much time and effort into it. And I think it's a beautifully done remaster. I would say it's a remake at this point. Full.
It's right on that line.
It's on the borderline, but it's a transformative experience, and it still reminds you of Oblivion. I've only played a few hours of it because I just kind of make podcasts and deal with my dog these days. I'd love to get into it if I ever have some time. But to me, it's the reason why I consider it a cash grab is because you can see that it's Bethesda wanting a stopgap in their revenue while they work on Elder Scrolls 6, which is going to take another fucking 10 years or something,
your kids will have kids by the time it comes out.
I'm going to be dead, almost certainly. Actually, there's probably like at least 30% of the people that I know will be dead by the time, Fallout 5 comes out, if not. But it's okay, man. That's life. But their development cycle is insane. And so I think they needed a stopgap. And also, the development of Sky Oblivion had been working for, since 2012 or 13 or something.
It's been a long time.
And they were going to release this year, and what a coincidence to just throw them entirely under the bus and release a official high budget remaster just a few months before they were going to release their decades worth of work, and then give them this little placating little we'll give you guys free copies. That's gonna assuage the fact that we just fucking took you completely out before your release, and it felt just a little shitty to me, and I maybe have turned on Todd and Bethesda after
it just works.
Starfield. It just works. I played thousands of hours of Oblivion, of Fallout New Vegas, Skyrim. I Fallout 4. I loved all those games, man. But they're just not they clearly don't really care about what their fan base wants, and the quality is just dropped off the hill, and it's a little concerning, especially when they're just holding on to these IPs. Like, no one else can make a Fallout game, no one else can make an Elder Scrolls game unless they specifically give them permission to in this case. And I don't know. That's why I feel like it's cash grabby. I love that it happens, because I think it's great to relive these old games, and I'm not, as much as I hate the rehashing things in film, I don't mind it so much in video games because I feel like I want to replay some of those old games.
Well, there's also an element of media preservation to it when you re-release something on a newer, and you can buy the physical copies again where they weren't being sold before. Or in the case of things like an RPG made in Japan that didn't come over, and then they remaster it, and now it's worldwide.
The access is difficult, that's true, because there's some games you just can't play anymore, like that only work on an older version of Windows. It's kind of like saving a lost film, like in the age when like acetate film stock would light up and like thousands of movies would just be gone forever, if a warehouse lit on fire or something like that. You'd lose movies, and so it's kind of like you lose games these days because the technology just moves on and they're left behind. So yeah, if they can bring that game back, you are kind of preserving the history of games in that way, and I like it in that sense.
There's I don't know if it's a rumor necessarily, but the general consensus, like everybody wants Bloodborne to be either remastered or a sequel to come out, but a lot of people seem to think that they just lost the files for it. Like they made it and they're like, it's done. And then somebody right click, delete. Oh man, did you emptied the bin, didn't you? Yeah. Okay. Well, it's gone now. And so
no backups.
No backups. Sometimes it just happened. I think there was one of the Final Fantasies that suffered from that. I think it was 8 where they were just cranking out 7, 8, 9 and all in a row. And I think they lost the files at 8, which is why we're rumoredly getting a remake of 9 and 7's being redone, but nobody's touching 8.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, I'm one of the only 8 people that liked Final Fantasy 8, but sometimes stuff like that happens and you lose the ability to preserve it the official way. So when something gets actually remastered that, we haven't seen in almost 2 decades, it's good. It adds a whole new layer of a new audience and
preservation for the future. Yeah, that's how American Idiot got made by Green Day. They left they had a whole album and it was not American Idiot, but it was the album they were gonna make. But then they left all the master tapes in a taxi cab. And then they were like, fuck, we got to make a whole new album in like a month. And so they did a whole new album with whole new music, and it was American Idiot. And they were like, they did the great job under pressure, and there you go, So sometimes destruction like that can make something great come out of, come out of the phoenix from the ashes or something,
Pine cones in the forest fire,
There you go. Yeah, exactly, man, But out of death comes life, man. It's a cycle, But I think, okay, so what do you think is the best example of video games as art that you can think of?
I don't know about a singular best, but the one
whatever comes to mind,
resonating in well, we've talked about it previously, but Disco Elysium. It's a great art piece, I think. Yeah, I think the way that it presents itself, the way it challenges the person interacting with it, not necessarily like Dark Souls challenge, but the way it looks at you and goes, yeah, you sitting there at the computer, you're stupid.
Yeah.
You're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what you're doing.
No matter anything, any path you take, you're stupid and it's all pointless. And I love that idea. I'm not gonna say ideology because there's so many ideologies in the game, but I love its ethos, and I love it's the way that it challenges the player to think, and then it just shits on the player no matter what they think, because it's so emblematic of life, and it's the feeling of kind of mid-adulthood, and the struggles you go through in understanding yourself and your relationship with the world, and the way all of us are trying to coexist. It's such a beautiful expression of humanity, and I love it in all of its dark, jaded kind of glory. Nothing is written that well.
Well, it was made by a bunch of starving artists, so of course it came out like that. That's usually suffering. And
the funny thing is now their studio has been co-opted by this awful fucking publisher that's not giving them any proceeds, from the sales, So don't buy Disco Elysium, everybody. Go take a trip on the high seas if you don't play it.
GOG or something.
Yeah. It's honestly, and as I'm sure as you know, anyone who's ever tried to create an artistic work, the fact that any artistic work actually gets released is kind of a miracle. Just the fact that there can be a successful cohesion of ideas and the productive elements of an idea that can then put it out, amongst people is a miracle, because there's so much against you. And the fact that with Disco Elysium, it came out so cohesive, such a brilliant writing. There's also a functional game, and there's so many layers to it, and all the different layers of your psyche that's involved, and it can branch in so many different paths, and you can choose. You can try to espouse any one of these ideologies. You can take it to its logical conclusion at the end, right?
And its illogical conclusion.
It always ends up being illogical because you can't win.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant in its layers in that way. Yeah. It's almost like an onion or an ogre.
Or an ogre, yeah.
Your point about Disco Elysium.
Specifically the way that it challenges anybody engaging with it, they are forced not to perform fence setting, basically. They want you to constantly look at the ups and downs of anything that you might believe and not be static and just sit like, I am, centrist and I'm not going anywhere.
I'm on the party platform.
Yes.
I align myself with this set of point of views because someone told me to. Yeah, and to just stay at that point and never evolve.
My initial playthrough was as a centrist sorry cop, because those are the things that I valued at the time. I wanted this character to, apologize for the things he had done wrong, try to improve himself. That felt like a good redemptive thing, and I was into it, but the game constantly mocked me for like, we just apologize for everything you did, so you just mean something of what you do, not everything needs an apology. And then being centrist, of course, I've since developed the sort of centrism is just conservatism. You want things to stay as they are. You don't really want to put any effort in, and you don't want anything to change. I think the importance of fences and fence setting is to see where the limitations are and what lines need to be crossed.
Yeah.
And that game actually helped show that to me, that I was being too passive in the way that I was thinking. I'm still passive physically. I don't do the things that I should be doing, but at least as far as thoughts are concerned, I'm less like, who really care? Like, everybody's kind of
like this, maybe not. Yeah.
Like, no, some people are worse than others, and I feel very strongly about that now. And I'm developing convictions that I didn't have as much before. I was very milquetoast. So I wanted to crank the dial up.
That's a good word.
Yeah. I wanted to crank the dial up a little bit. And between that and the YouTube algorithm, radicalize my thoughts a little bit more, zhuzh it up, energize, be a little more awake, both politically and morally. And Disco Elysium played a part in that for me.
Yeah. Like shaming a notion that is normally kind of prized, the idea of like, the ideal centrists, kind of like, trying to reconcile all parties, like, let's all just get along, everybody. But in reality, you can't think that way. In centrism, it ends up feeling like kind of a cop-out, especially because the idea of the center, the political center, is something that is very, very subjective, based, number one, on the country you're in and the time and of itself. That dynamic is constantly shifting. The left of today is entirely not the left of even 30 or 50 or 100 years ago. And the left in the United States is not the same as the left in Europe. In America, the left, at least the authoritarian establishment left, is decidedly center-right, in a more accurate scheme of things. And so if you attempt to be a centrist often, if it comes from a lack of political education or political interest, that's perfectly fine, because I think that most people kind of lean towards centrism, maybe center left, because they have compassion in their hearts, but they don't particularly have the knowledge or the interest in the political systems, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, I don't think that participation, I don't think that active participation in government is necessary amongst the people, and I don't think that it's good for everyone to engage in it. I'm not really a fan of democracy, I'll be honest with you. Crazy thing to say, I don't know, but it didn't really work in ancient Athens, and it doesn't really work today. I actually encourage people not to vote. I don't know if that's a hot take or not.
I might say that's a hot take.
Yeah. I'm sure you disagree with me. And for me, I think that if you don't understand the things that you are voting about, I think it's much better for you to stay home, and because I think that's when it comes to the ability for everyone to participate in the democratic process, all right, it sounds fundamentally good, all right, but it is very, very subject, and the people as a whole, the lowest common denominator of people, are subject to mob rule and the whims of the masses, all right?
Well, also, you have things like gerrymandering and, redlining and...
Well, that's kind of an authoritative
college
changing of our ability to affect the political system. Yeah, I mean that's not really. And what you're saying is that, and obviously we don't exist in a true democracy. We exist in a representative democracy, which is highly influenced by money, and big business. So we don't engage in direct democracy. Nor was direct democracy ever truly a successful or sustained system in actuality. It's just impossible on any scale. It was only truly realized in Rome in the form of the Republic, but even then it was not successful. And it was extremely corrupt in ancient Rome, just as our Republic is extremely corrupt today, because by nature it is infected with money. And so the question is, can we have a representative democracy that is not corrupted by money? Because that's the single most insidious part of it, and why it fails is because our politics are bought and sold.
Would you say that money is the root of all evil?
Oh, I could say that.
I think there's an argument to be made about chucking the baby out with the bathwater on our systems as they are, because you don't have, like you say, you don't have that direct line. But what's a good alternative? Like, I don't think we should go up the mountain to the cave and beseech the dragon for the next ruler or anything, but maybe we should. I mean,
the last time that Americans decided to throw out an existing system and establish a new one, we created something that was pretty unique and created a lot of great utility. And that, of course, was the Constitution. It was a new framework for society that lifted up many people and created something resembling a free society, even though that free society has been infected by money to the extent that we are none of us really free, right? And so it's kind of like a logical conclusion of trying to restart that republic. And the founders were very informed by the Roman Republic, and then we're falling into the same pitfalls that they did 2,000 years ago, with extreme influence of money at the highest level. Right, senators were wealthier than 99.9% of the rest of the people, and just as much as they are today, just as much as Nancy Pelosi is, worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, even though she makes $120,000 a year or something like that.
The lobby should not exist.
It should not. But how do you do that?
We could have another whole episode about the whole structure of that, because I'm not as knowledgeable about it right in this moment as I would like to be.
Yeah.
But even from way out here, I can see at the other end of the spectrum, like that, there's no reason that should be a thing. Mm-hmm. And you get the issues with money influencing literally everything that happens. So it has to be, even whether it's government or video games or whatever, it always just muddies the waters. Mm-hmm. And we can't make good decisions and do good things because, well, I don't make any money if I make this decision that's going to actually help people and pull people out of the squalor that we put them in the first place.
Yeah.
So why would I bother? Plus, we've got, Papa Israel going like, hey, I'll give you money if you don't do that. How about that?
It's like it's a weird kind of counterintuitive idea, because it's supposed to be that the entrepreneurial mindset is supposed to encourage you to take risks in order to succeed, but it actually, with the extremely high cost of living it actually makes you kind of risk averse to make any kind of bold decisions and changes in your life, because it's paralyzing trying to exist when rent is $2,000 a month, etc. But for me, I found that I abandoned the hyper-capitalist libertarian mindsets when I really noticed how much disgust I had for marketing and the movements of money and the extraction of wealth from me and from people around me. And I started to notice how pervasive it was, this extraction. And the fact that we don't own anything anymore, and that's, we're basically paying rents to live, in every aspect of our lives, and so this gave a really strong feeling of disgust from me, and I realized that this is something that is self-perpetuating, and is the end goal is always greater profiteering, greater extraction. The
Number
end goal
needs to go up.
Yeah. There always had to be increasing profits for shareholders every year. It has to expand or it's going to die, is the theory. And so who is then left at the bottom end of that? Who is being exploited? It's everyday people, and they don't benefit from this massive expanding system. They're lied to and told that they're participating in it, but they're not participating in it. They're just holding it up by the sweat of their brow, and they see very little benefit from it. And that's how I get kind of more left leaning as I get older. I don't know about you. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think several decades ago, it was probably the opposite. As you got, they always talk about you get older and you get grumpier and you don't care what other people are feeling. But there's something about maybe perhaps our generation specifically that, like, as we're all getting older, there's an element of like, what are we doing? Like,
there's a disillusionment.
I'm tired of being angry. Already. I'm in my early 30s and I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of trying to take what's mine. I just want everybody to be okay. And it gets, as I get more tired, I'm less willing to fight people for having what they want. You know what I mean? And it's less of the doormat sort of let people do what they want thing and more of, you should have that. There's no reason why. It's healthy for you to want these things. You should have these things, and wasting energy on trying to fight people for these things is a waste of everyone's time. And it seems like everybody is promised a certain world from the previous generation. Like, hey, you're going to have this, you can hustle and make $1 million and you can have these things. But earlier and earlier in life, each generation is hitting that wall. Like, no, that's not how that's gonna work. I can already tell.
It's difficult because it is absolutely possible. There is no steadfast class division in the United States. There is a blurred line between the classes. There is the possibility that even as a very poor person, you can become successful. That is not the chance is not zero, but the system is increasingly and extremely stacked against that possibility, and every level of that system in the public and private spheres is designed to keep people in a particular economic bracket that keeps them as consumers, right? And
there's no incentive for other people, the one percenters, to let more people into the club.
Yeah, no. So there's two ways to look at it. For one, it's not a zero-sum game. All right, wealth creation is not. I don't subscribe to the idea that if one person creates wealth, inherently they're subtracting wealth from someone else. That's not really economically true mathematically. However, right, the circumstances of how many people gain wealth can detract from the general populace's ability to then rise up on the whole, right? Because in general, capitalism has risen the poorest among us in general to a higher level than they would have been otherwise, because now many lower income people have a car, a TV, things that never would have been possible, 50, 100 years ago, something like that. Stuff that kings did not have in ancient times. Now the poorest among us do. Not the poorest among us, but let's say the poorest 25%. It's people who have a home, things like that. And so in general, you have a lifting up of most people, but at the same time, the disparity is massive and growing. Right? Between the highest earners and everyone else. And the protection of that class against the majority of people, and the goal of keeping us in a certain economic bracket that keeps us wanting to consume and not actually better ourselves. Think about all the mechanisms that are designed to make you spend money, and spend so much money that you aren't allowed to save enough to buy a house, right? To get enough savings to to go to college, to protect yourself against the vicissitudes of the economy, disasters, things like that. I mean, think about credit cards. Think about couponing even. Think all these things that that are ostensibly designs, oh, they're good for you. But in reality, why did they send you that credit card offer in the mail? Why did they send you those coupons in the mail? They sent you that because they use it to extract more money from you. It's not good for you. It's good for them. It increases their profits because you wouldn't buy that stuff otherwise, right? All of a sudden, you have the ability to spend money that you never would have because you've been given the incentive, right, in order to participate more in their economy than you would otherwise. Instead of saving that money, now you're spending it on shit that you may not need, And so for me, the encouragements, the subliminally to buy stuff that you don't need is very, very ugly, and very invasive. And I hate that impetus. I hate marketing. I hate anything that tries to get inside your head and tell you need this thing. You didn't need this before, but now you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. What the fuck were we talking about?
It's been a long, winding trail. I will say that if they're getting 69 cents out of me and I get 42 items, I don't really feel like they won. And I get where that's coming from. I get the concept of that's the whole point of coupons.
If they didn't win, they wouldn't give it to you. It's like maybe, remember the profit margins in a lot of these things is higher than you might think. Some of these things cost a fraction of a cent to produce, and you can absolutely, if you can extract the utility out of these things that you buy, if you get a good deal on something you absolutely need, then there's absolutely benefit to be had there. And that's why this isn't a black and white thing, because you can extract benefit from it. But that's the illusion that makes you feel like you are winning. But in the ends, you aren't the one who's winning. You're the one who is participating in a capitalist system as a worker, as a consumer, and you are not extracting wealth from this. You are being extracted from, even though you might think that you are benefiting from it.
So the idea is not to play the same game that they're playing. We're playing a completely different game. You use the coupons to get an obscene amount of items, let's say toiletries, and then they get used to help people who don't have them otherwise and don't have access to the coupons or don't have access to the car to drive to the store. Mm-hmm. And it is, I don't want to say it's communist adjacent, but like the idea of you can win, take your 69 cents, whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about something bigger.
Yeah.
Here's 7 packages of jumbo toilet paper that now people can have that they couldn't have gotten before.
Yeah.
And
that's a great thing to do. I mean, I absolutely support that. If you can use your energies to help other people, that's a fantastic thing. And I love to support that, and charity is a wonderful thing as long as it's not just being used as a tax break, but, right. And so
Publix, I'm looking at you.
But look at it in the grand scheme of things. They create this system. They created 99 cents. They created couponing, all this stuff in order to encourage you to buy more. And if you try and use that for good, even acknowledging your part in it, then you can find some solace in that. And I think it's absolutely good to do what you can in the midst of a corrupt system to help your fellow man. And that's great. But in the end, you are participating and prolonging a system that in the end does not benefit you, And that's the thing. Breaking the system would be so painful. That's the thing, because we do benefit from it. We just are extracted more from it. But there's a difference between the implicit benefits and then there's this extra added value to it. And that's what the capitalists extract, is that added value. Point is that we are exploited. Yeah. But also we benefit from that. We do. And so that's what makes it so hard to break off that system, because we don't want to stop that benefit.
I'm doing well because other people are being exploited more than me.
Yeah. I've got a leg up on them. Those fucking losers, man. 2 legs look at me, man. Guys. Yeah, exactly.
Crisscross applesauce.
Maybe I'll be a capitalist someday, man.
I have no illusions of being in the Fortune 500.
See, I don't want to. That's the thing. I have no interest in grand success. I want to live a full life.
A fulfilling life.
Yeah. And, your definition of full life is something that's going to vary by person to person, but mine does not involve the acquiring of massive amounts of wealth. I mean, I want to live comfortably and tuned with nature, and to have, people who around me who I love and who love me. That's my only goals in life, and maybe to have a few bells and whistles around the end, because I like stuff for sure, but not to an excessive extent. I don't feel the need to collect and hoard wealth, but that's going to vary by person to person, and more people are going to have the interest in that entrepreneurial spirit. I really don't have that, I mean, and that's why I don't particularly want to stay here for the rest of my life. Because I think
on planet Earth.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm leaving a jet plane, man.
You and Katy Perry are going to space,
rocket man. Oh yeah, to the upper atmosphere, and then we'll come back down 5 minutes later and kiss the ground because I miss the Earth so much.
And then you're gonna dance weird at all your concerts.
Exactly. And how much did it cost to send Katy Perry to space? It was
I have no idea.
$600 grand or something like that. I don't know. It was
enough to help a struggling group of families for several years.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we had more important things to do, Zach.
Oh,
all right?
yeah, sorry,
We had
sorry,
to send
sorry,
Katy Perry to space, all right?
Yeah, those jumpsuits.
Check your
aren't cheap.
privilege, all right?
Yeah.
Anyways. All right. I would like to move on to our next topic, Zach.
Okay, what is our next topic?
I think, what was it? Romanticizing the past?
Sure,
I'm trying
yeah.
to think. Okay.
Why Rome?
Okay.
Why?
You mean, okay, so what you want me to say is that Rome was actually a terrible place with exploitation, slavery, with it conquered peoples who were killed in the masses, with lots of poverty, disease, and everything, because there were bad things about Rome. Is that what you mean? That I shouldn't idolize it?
No, I'm specifically asking what about Rome makes you want to overlook those things to focus on what things do you like that you're focused on? Like, why not Egypt? Why not Mesopotamia?
Well, okay. So Rome is kind of the foundation of the kind of all the Western cultural, legal, and political values that we espouse in the modern world, right? Things like our alphabets, our legal system, just the organization of our society, as well as our culture, kind of all sourced from ancient Rome. And I think that it was a interesting example of a conquering force that really only wanted civility. All they wanted was peace and they wanted order, and they would do anything to get there. And they would demand so little. All they demanded of places they conquered is that they call themselves Roman and that they abide by Roman laws. But they allowed them to keep their gods, keep their cultures, and they didn't care what people looked like. There was no concept of racism at that time. All they wanted is that you learned Latin and became a part of the Roman cultural system, right? And so I think it made it really easy for it to spread, and they just built this incredible network of infrastructure, roads, aqueducts. They modernize and civilize huge parts of the world that are now still like based on that beautiful bones they created. And there was violence, certainly, because it was a violent world, but they minimized that violence and created the first truly, I think, civilized wide-scale civilization, that then led to all the modern elements of culture that we have today. And also, it was just a simpler life. And in general, I think the quality of life was not terrible. And they also, it's the weather was nice, bro. Like, listen, all right.
What?
And they had cool fucking uniforms, dude. All right, have you seen the uniforms?
You want to wear the little?
I have a toga actually. I'm not obsessed, but also, yeah. I mean, the roots of everything that frames our society today came from Rome, and they weren't just like like loose philosophizers and boy lovers, etc. Like in ancient Greece, I mean, they had order, they had a system, and they grew that system extremely well. And all they asked was that you abide by our laws, which are fair. And we won't mess with you. We won't destroy your culture. We don't care what you look like as long as you join Rome and be Roman. And I think that was a beautiful thing, And that's the authoritarian, almost fascist side of me sometimes. That I think that there needs to be some level of social order, And so, yeah, I do love Rome. And I think that maybe a lot of people don't understand, especially with most people when they're thinking about Rome once a day, why Rome was great. But
I only think about Rome once a day because of you, right? I don't normally think about Rome.
You thought about it before. What do you think about Gladiator often?
No,
I think about Gladiator all the time.
I don't think I've even seen that movie all the way through.
Fuck. All right, so do you have critiques of my love for Rome?
Well, when you said they're gonna roll into town and all they're gonna ask of you is just a light cultural flattening, right? You say that they respected their culture and weren't racist, but they didn't really racism was kind of invented later, basically. But
well, I mean, there was curiosity of other races, but there wasn't this subjugation of people based upon their skin color or separation of, I mean, people would look at other people and be like, wow, they look different. That's really interesting. But there wasn't this idea of like, you are less than me. I'm sure there was an individual basis because we're tribal people. And to some extent, the idea of the other is always going to be a thing. But in Rome, it didn't matter who you looked like. There were people from all corners of the empire, from North Africa to Northern Europe, to Western Asia, and they all looked very different, but they didn't care. They were just, as long as you act Roman. And I think there's a beautiful multiculturalism in that. It was the first like multicultural society that was successful.
But why even that asterisk of, but you have to be Roman? Like, why couldn't you just be a part of it kind of feels like where we're at right now, where we're like, well, Greenland and Canada can be 51 and 52.
Yeah.
But it just kind of feels like there was a way ostensibly to push out and extend, and I mean the fact that they felt the need to push out and extend in the first place is part of the problem. I mean, we do have a lot of what we are because of that, but I don't feel like that necessitates even a positive look, because we would just be different. Like, well, no, we wouldn't be the same, but I don't feel like that's necessarily bad.
It's a modern perspective. At that time in the world, and even up until the very recent developments of a globalized economy, conquering was simply how different nations kind of interacted with each other. Conquering was a regular aspect of warring life. And so in many cases throughout history, when cultures were conquered, they were utterly destroyed. Like what the Mongols did. As much as I love Genghis Khan and the conquerings they made were so massive. I mean, the spread of land from China all the way to Eastern Europe, was massive, fast, and incredibly powerful. Their conquests were. However, they were insanely destructive. They murdered millions, and they left nothing in their path. They left nothing but burned cities
and sperm.
Yeah. Yeah, he was fucking laying those things down, man, everywhere, man. He was like, line them up. All right? But I'm related. You can see it. I'm a little Genghis Khan, man. You got a little Genghis Khan in you too, bro.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, bro. Thanks, great granddad.
Great granddad.
But they left nothing but destruction in their wake. But the Romans did not. I mean, on every chance they did, they left civilization intact, and they promoted the spread of civilization and peace wherever they could. And sometimes there was a lot of death, especially when there was a particularly awful emperor like Caracalla or something like that. I mean, and that was an unfortunate aspect of having an all-out despot, who could occasionally be insane. But in general, they wanted to lift up civilization, not to destroy it. And that what I think, and in that sense of conquering, which now we think of as crazy because we live in a globalized world where we have relatively free trade and we benefit from our mutual relationships, we don't just merely want to destroy our neighbors to take their lands, but that was the way of the world for many, many thousands of years. And so in that sense, Rome, they participated in conquering, which to them was like, we're bringing the light of Rome to the uncivilized world. And maybe that was the case, maybe it wasn't. Maybe their idea of what was barbarian was subjective for sure, but they did bring infrastructure, they brought literacy, and they brought order to many parts of the world that were violent and beset upon by gang violence. And it was, I think that conquering was productive, but and that's the thing, but it's a different time, Now, would it seem right? Do I think we should annex Greenland and Canada? No. That's insane.
Because that's basically what we're doing now, right? Like, even those things aside, like
it does kind of reek a little bit of the, annexation of the Sudeten lands and in Austria. But, is that going to lead to an invasion of Poland? I don't think so. But it does reek a little bit of the same energies.
Yeah, just girly things.
Yeah, just hashtag.
Yeah, hashtag American things.
Blitzkrieg. Yeah, man.
Yeah, I don't. It feels similar enough that it gives me heebie-jeebies, but there's a point about it being a different time. I have complicated feelings about it was a different time because there were people developing morals and things outside of religion and outside of, what we have as in the modern day. You had philosophers coming up with what virtue was, and obviously we could go into Stoicism if you wanted, but like let's talk about it. This is Stoicism
time.
It's Stoicism
That's
time.
the Marcus Aurelius button.
The Cicero button.
Oh, hell, man, the Seneca button, bro.
No, so that being essentially a moral framework that you had already at that time, there is nothing in there about if we don't expand, then we cease to be or something. There's nothing. I guess you could say that was the law of nature and you were acting in accordance with nature, but I feel like Rome could have been fine if it hadn't jizzed all over the world. And
okay, so what you're reading is one perspective of certain philosophers that were generally not in the rule of the world at that time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, with the exception of Marcus Aurelius, he was really the only true philosopher king. For the most parts, the Roman emperors kind of despised and hated the philosophers. I mean, Emperor Nero even had Seneca killed, I mean, after he tried for years and years to teach him to be kind of a little prudent, but obviously he had no intention of doing that. But for the most part, philosophers were mid-level thinkers. They really weren't making huge dictations upon society, and there was a huge prevalence of warlike sentiments that became the pervading moral view of the time. Like you look in Plato's Republic, and this was in the first book of Plato's Republic. This is dialogues in Athens between Socrates and a few of his friends. They discussed, the purpose of the state, what is its nature, how people play into it, and one of the people he's talking to, I believe his name was Thrasymachus. I might be saying that incorrectly, but he was one of the kind of one of the friends of Socrates that he was bouncing ideas off of, And Socrates, he just liked to walk around and just say wild shit to people and to see how they responded, and that was his favorite thing, and that's all he did, really. Yeah, exactly. He was just a wild street philosopher, just putting the mic in front of everybody and be like, "Hey."
What do you think about poor people? Tell me.
But so Thrasymachus, or however his name is, I'll put it in his name right here. But he was warlike, and he believed that's goodness, right? That justice came from power and was defined by the people in power, and was defined by their ability to then exert that power upon other people. And this was the pervading thoughts in Athens at the time. Many other people felt like this, especially the common people, because they were very, very susceptible to the orations of sophists, and who basically preyed upon their violence and fearful instincts, to say, Sparta is gonna fucking conquer us, dude. We gotta hit him first. And we got to be strong. We have to have a strong military. We have to devote our energies towards conquest, stuff like that. And this was a common feeling at the time. Many people believed in that, especially because when you have real people just outside your city that could come kill you, all right, the threat of death and the need for violence is a lot more real of a feeling than it is today in our world, where the thought of death is something very, very, you're thinking like, oh, I'll definitely die in maybe like 50, 60 years, not like I could die any day. I mean, they had civilization, but right beyond civilization's door was violence and death. It was always a present thing. So this creates violent people, and there may be pockets of time where people can be poets and philosophers, but death was a much nearer thing to them. And so there was a pervading idea of conquering and the need to subjugate other people in order to survive. And if you read philosophers that think differently, those were not really the pervading thoughts of that time. We may read them now because they have interesting reflections upon how we feel today, but it's kind of like, I'm not going to say like a broken clock is right twice a day or something like that. It's more just like we're picking out parts of history that happen to survive, and we find that they reflect and align with our views today, and we think, oh, they were like us, but they weren't like us in large in the great preponderance of them. Yeah, they were hungry and horny, and they had similar desires, but their morals were vastly different from ours. They sacrificed shit, right? And they killed people en masse, and they didn't live life like we do today, So that's why I think the different time thing is very valid, because we don't know what people were like as much as we'd like to think we do. And so your priorities, even 50 years ago, were very different. Look at boomers, dude. Look at the way they treat waiting staff. And you think, how the fuck do you treat people who are trying to serve you this horribly? And that's just 1 or 2 generations away, and we still cannot understand their moral framework. And that's, imagine trying to understand people 2,000 years ago and their moral framework. There's such a huge disconnect there. I've been talking for way too long, Zach, right? But did I make my point?
Yeah, you did. So all I really want to say is I'm pretty sure empathy existed before all of that.
No.
I'm pretty sure we developed empathy pretty early on. And I get that I'm coming from thousands of years away, and I've had time to sit in comfort in the air conditioning and shitting in a toilet and all the things that people might not have had in the past, and think deeply about, hey, just don't be a dick.
But empathy for what? Because think about how empathy can be directed. Like Aristotle had a very empathetic defense of the concept of slavery. And he thought that it was actually destructive and unempathetic to free slaves because they don't understand and cannot deal with the life outside of slavery because they aren't mentally designed for it. And to free slaves is actually an unkindness to them. And this he defended very, very steadfastly, along with many other notions of philosophy and science that he created. So it's like, I think the concept of empathy has evolved quite a bit, and the way that you direct that empathy can be either productive or very destructive, depending on the context.
I guess it's the crossroads where empathy and knowledge meet, because if you knew anything about the way humans work, you would know that there's really no empathetic argument to make there about keeping slaves, because the only reason slaves couldn't handle the world outside is because you haven't taught them yet. Because they
were educated slaves.
Some of them probably were, but if they were educated, then they would be fine. If they're capable of waking up in the morning
from your
and
modern perspective, where you live in a world that is majorly without slavery, even though there does still exist slavery, but where the concept of freedom is something that is so deeply ingrained in your culture. But the concept of freedom was not deeply ingrained in our culture before the evolution of English common law that led to the Declaration of Independence and the concept of freedom of men. We didn't have, this was 1200 years before the Magna Carta, before the conception that people, or at least lords in that case, had rights that could not be taken away from them. There was no concept of rights, and there's no concept of liberty and freedom. These are new concepts. And I don't mean to get into boring history stuff, but it's like, it is insanely relative to your time. The ideas that you espouse, the foundations of your framework of being, and you think, of course, people should be free. It's insane to think people shouldn't be free, but people were not free for most of time. And that's a super new concept.
Free now.
We aren't. But we're just enslaved in a way that's more, blurring, than it was like a literal slavery. Now we're just in a slavery to ideas and to money. But anyways,
ultimately I fall back on it. I feel like this is outside of any generation or age or time. You just think about being in that person's position. Do you think, if you are in that position, do you think it's fair to be there?
Yeah.
If you were clapped in irons and forced to haul limestone, would you think that's a life worth living? Would you be happy being there, knowing that was all you were ever able to do? So I don't understand how you can easily make that jump and say that other people should do it. We do the same thing with wage gaps here. Well, they're not as educated as us, so they deserve to not make as much money. That's just how it works.
It's so easy to rationalize your pitiful place in life, though. I mean, in some ways, it's almost a defense mechanism. You have to kind of rationalize your place in life, and and you can even, in its modern kind of an extreme way, you could say that billionaire grind set bro kind of thing is a way of rationalizing the fact that you're working, 80 hours a week or something like that. You're grinding, bro. Meanwhile, I mean, what are you really gaining from this? I mean, you're fucking breaking your back and you're tired. And are you really benefiting from this system? I mean, how much money are you enjoying your life? Are you enjoying your life? Yeah. You're rationalizing your kind of exploitation and the destruction of your body and minds for someone else's benefit, and absolutely slaves did that in the past. There were people who very much believed that that was their station in life and that there was actually value in that. And it's so easy to inculcate that in people's minds, and even though you'd think it'd be like, how this is so unjust, this position I'm in, but there's also bitterness and there's hatred. And some people don't want to see other people rise up out of their station, like people are like, who is he to be free? Like,
and those people are wrong.
Yeah. And I agree with you, but I think that our perspective on that is really, really subjective and informed by modern ideas that are good, but did not exist at the time we're talking about. In some form, but not among the general consciousness, Again,
that's the only reason I bring up the putting yourself in the other person's shoes or sandals or whatever at the time, because anybody was capable of doing that at any point that you could have fully cognitive thought. You could always look at somebody and go, well, what if that was me? Mm-hmm. You were always able to do that. So you were always able to look at something and go, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. Why does this person have to do that?
Yeah.
And be able to apply that. So no, they didn't have the circumstances that allowed me to be feeling the way that I do about things, but they were always able to engage that kind of empathy. It's just everybody it's surprising what the human brain can become comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And you get raised as a child saying some people are just haul limestone all day and they don't get paid for it, and that's because their grandfather tripped and spilled a guy's drink and now he owes him money for the robe that he got wine on or something.
You're like, you know what, at least I didn't get beaten today, at least I didn't get my hands chopped off today was a good day.
And if you're raised from jump to be told that that's the way the world works, a lot of people either can't, won't, or don't question it.
Allegory of the cave, man.
And
all you see is shadows in the cave wall. You don't know what's beyond that.
Yeah. But again, I think, if one guy's eating a vegetable and you're eating a piece of meat, you can look at that and be like, well, would I enjoy that more than this? Mm-hmm. That's always been a thing. That's why we take things from other people, is thinking about what they have and how it would be better for us than for them, or, so you could always engage that in the other. You've always been able to engage that in the other direction and go, I don't think that guy should have to haul limestone. I don't know why I keep using that example, but obviously
limestone.
Cool shit has happened. Like the pyramids exist, but like that was like, we marvel at it. Wow. But that was a tomb for some dude. Like what did it advance society? What did it?
But in their perspective, that pyramid was a tomb, but to them, the ascendance of their pharaoh to the afterlife safely and securely was integral to the survival of their civilization. To them, they were inculcated with the idea that their children, the children's children, will not prosper if the pharaoh is not sent to the afterlife in an absolutely grand and beautiful way. And that was the purpose of the pyramid. So they devoted all of the wealth and effort and toil of their society towards doing that, because to them, the pyramid was their salvation. And they so believed that so deeply. And so to them, their empathy was, again, the objective of it was the same thing. I want to thrive. I want my kids to thrive. But the context of that was our pharaoh needs to go in the afterlife and needs this big fucking rock, that just has a point on the tip to send him there. And we have to allow the death of thousands of people and this extreme expense, and this very difficult engineering project to make it happen. But that's what we have to do, and we can't imagine that these days, because it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's, why the hell is building this big pyramid going to help our kids? But to them, that was essential. And so they were thinking about the survival that they believed was necessitated through these huge monuments. So it's all perspective again.
Yeah. I feel like, well, do we know that they were slaves? I don't remember. But if that were the case, I feel like you could have achieved it without that.
Without the great scale or the death that was involved in it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, to them, it was like, it has to be this big, and in order to make it that big, it required thousands and thousands of people. Some of them were slaves, some of them were not. There were also extremely skilled artisans, engineers, and there was a concept of, we're not going to get into this, but it was kind of like what indentured servitude is? Something like that. Is what
I'm Irish, I know about that.
Okay, yeah. Yes. So your ancestors were slaves in the Senate too. Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I'm a little sketchy saying that out loud, but...
it's a fact. fact, most people at some points were slaves unless your ancestors were kings, because at least like a third of the population of many ancient civilizations were slaves, and it did not matter what they looked like. They were in that class, and that's where they were. So absolutely our ancestors were slaves, just not as recently as some other people, man. But anyways, we wanted to talk about men, right?
Yeah. What it means to be a man. Masculinity.
Let's ask Jordan Peterson.
We're going to ask what is a woman on here too? We're going to get into that.
Well, let's ask Kermit. Let's see, what is a woman?
When you understand how the history of men has been in the past. No, I'm not going to. I can't do that.
Pretty good.
I'm going to start crying. I can't make myself cry on camera.
You need to add Canadian to the Kermit, and then you've got him right there, man. You sound like you're always on the verge of tears. All right, so manliness in the context of today's world, right? I mean, compared to the past, I mean, like, where do you think masculinity is headed, right? What do you think the issues of it are today, and what could we do about that?
So, given that I'm not quite the history buff that you are, I can only really speak to.
We're done talking about history. Everyone's bored as fuck of that shit. Don't worry. Present time from now on.
Most of recent American history, I can say that the problems with masculinity are the same as they've always been. They haven't changed. And it's the way we raise our boys. It's the way that we teach kids to interact with each other and what to expect from life. Mm-hmm. And you give us the expectation that if you participate in capitalism, participate in performing masculinity, you wear the right colors and you don't do anything considered feminine, you don't, you go to work and you pay your bills, and then you'll be given dominion, basically. They're told that you'll fight for the keys. Like, there's this notion in the past of if you were a virgin, you could go to war instead, and you could still affirm your manhood. And you either had to do one or the other, or both, but you couldn't do neither.
Also, there's prostitutes in the country you're at war in, and you'll be just fine.
Usually, yeah, you go to Korea or wherever, and you come back with a wife.
May love you long time.
And, we don't have to do that necessarily, but cut that. Cut that. So there's an element of having men be taught to dominate and sort of.
Do you think that's toxic inherently?
Yes. Not giving other men the chance to feel or express or live in a way that they choose. Like, my son is getting to that age where he's starting to enjoy things just as he wants to, and he's interested in like painting his nails occasionally, that good stuff like that. And I can't help but feel worried in the instance that someone else is going to like man check him and be like, that's not something that men. And obviously we've all had, like, in this modern day, we've had this discussion of course boys should be allowed to do what they want or whatever. But I'm going to say my biggest issue is that phrase, boys will be boys. I think that fully encapsulates everything that I want to say, because it's a thing I hear moms say all the time about their young boys. It's, boys will be boys. They're just punching each other in the mouth and they're stealing things.
Or like John Hamm, when he was in a college fraternity, just killed a guy by hammering him in the nuts with a fucking hammer, and then burying him under the floorboards all night. Boys will be boys.
Yeah, I mean, our sons all do that, right? That's just part of being a man. That's the trials and tribulations of manhood. And it ties into discussions of Stoicism, like what most people understand of the word Stoic, maybe not Stoic philosophy,
which is a failure, I think.
What we call Broicism now. I love that term. Modern Broicism is you can't feel your emotions; those aren't useful.
It's emotional repression in a toga, right? Is how most people view Stoicism these days.
Yeah. And it causes so much pain, unnecessary pain. It causes so much damage. And the thing, I'm going to use the big scary word here, and I'm sorry, but patriarchy, it only benefits, it only benefits people at the very top of, I'm done. Podcast over. He said the word.
It's the no word.
Yeah. They're coming for me right now. Mm-hmm. So it hurts men too, right? Some people hear the word patriarchy or patriarchal society, you picture that every single man is 100% privileged and has all the benefits, and that's not necessarily how it works. Just like with capitalism, everybody works where everybody is told that they can work towards this goal and that they will be given these things if they perform the correct version of this.
Yeah.
But in an actuality, how many people are actually exploited by capitalism? How many people are exploited by patriarchy? And how many of those people are actually men? Now, this doesn't mean that men have it so hard in the sense that, men didn't have to fight for the right to vote, for instance. Obviously, we don't.
Well, actually, they did, because for one, the concept of voting is, again, relatively recent. And up until recently, voting was for property owning wealthy men.
Yeah.
All right. So many men in poor middle classes did have to fight for the right to vote and did not have the privilege to vote until relatively recently. It wasn't 1919 recent, but it was relatively recent. So yes, men have had to fight for that same thing.
It's more that they didn't have to fight for the right to vote because they were men. But for women up to a certain point, that was the factor. And that being used as a sort of undercut, well, it's not really that patriarchal or whatever, because men also suffer doesn't mean that they're suffering at the hands of other men.
You think that voting is equivalent to not suffering?
No.
It's funny because we know what voting is called, right? Suffrage.
Yeah. There we
actually, the majority of women at that time did not support women's suffrage. Yeah. It was a small minority of women who wanted that. Most of them did not want women to be able to vote, which is a crazy idea.
The joy of being centrist, You don't want this.
Yeah, I mean, not going to say they didn't, but the majority of women did not want to participate in politics at the time. They didn't think it was like the domain of women, which sounds crazy, but that was the majority view at the time.
I think some people still feel that way.
But I think they maybe come from some sexist reasons, I think. Yeah. But again, it's a modern perspective thing. We think, of course, women should have the right to vote. But up until that time, they're like, "Are you sane? What are you saying? Why?" But not like
if you don't leave the house, how do you know what to vote for?
Where's my sandwich? Why are you at the voting booth? So, anyways, okay. So back to the root point of it. Okay, yes. So how is masculinity affected by our modern perceptions of it, right? And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, for one, I don't think that masculinity is a good or bad thing. It is a natural thing. Yeah. It is a product of the hormones that make us who we are, that make 50% of the population who we are, right? Plus or minus with 49%. With outliers. It's slightly less. Yeah, we're not talking about the outliers of of non-binary, etc. Things like that. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the preponderance of male and female. It's what makes men the way they are, for better or for worse, right? And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it, but it is something that men have to be made aware of. The kind of evil potentialities of their energies, and those energies, which can be very productive and very good, should be put towards the right things. And that's the purpose, especially of a father in a kid's life, is to be able to show them how to channel your energies, because those masculine energies can lead to some terrible ends, but also to some great ends. You look at the exploding hormones of teenagers. There's nothing more dangerous than a teenage boy in a group of teenage boys. Yes. Right? They will fuck shit up just because they're raging. Their hormones are exploding out of their heads. They want to fuck everything they see, and they want to kill everything they see. And we may not talk about that, but it can be a very dangerous thing. But those energies, when controlled, can lead to incredible agency in life that can lead to the betterment of everyone around them, right? So there's absolutely nothing wrong with well-channeled masculinity, because men can do great things, and they have done great things in the past, and it's not in spite of testosterone, it's because of who they are, and the hormones are a component of that, So I don't think we can just squeeze what makes men, but I also don't think it should just be, men are going to be men, but it's just like they need to be properly trained, educated, and be fitted with a moral center that is going to allow their masculinity to lead them to do good things in life. Yeah. And if they don't have that, it's going to lead to bad things, because that's just an energy. It's just like a dog, man. A dog is just a loving, animal that can be very strong, and it can be a good thing or it can be an evil thing, depending on how a human decides to raise them and train them. You can train a dog to kill, or you can train a dog to love, and it's not the dog's fault. It's how it is raised, Yeah. And if you don't raise a man right, he's going to do bad things, And the same for women, but their energies can often go in different directions, but they also have that potential, But masculinity is a very potent thing. And so it's just something that we have to be aware of in our education of our kids. And I think that education is something that's not prioritized and is kind of falling behind in terms of our regard for the potentialities of it. We're looking at all these problems in society. We're saying, where the fuck these come from? Well, it's because no one's being properly educated. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that's why I use the term masculinity and not manhood.
Yeah.
Because even women can perform masculinity. It's an angle of these sort of society.
Nothing. Continue.
It's a group of societal traits that we've all unspokenly agreed on that go one way or another.
Both men and women have masculine and feminine traits, and there's no way that everyone's going to align with any certain amount of them.
Like, I know sitting here, to anyone who's observing me, I'm not the most masculine looking dude you've ever seen in your life.
I'm what you're talking about, bro. You look graceful. Like a king, son.
Yeah, I'm and obviously that's something I've struggled with my whole life. You get these macho style men who've been bred to be self-sufficient and stoic and all these other things to
makes me cringe.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm
But it's true because that word is what they've been taught to be, but it's a misapprehension of that concept.
There's a new word for it now.
What, Broicism?
Yeah. Emotional constipation.
Yeah.
So emotionally constant. Yes.
I can't let it out.
These things combine and force men and groups of other men to effectively police each other, to enforce this hegemonic idea of what being a man should be. Like, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't say good things about your partner when they're not in the room, like that. There's a whole subgenre of comedy where, like, oh, my wife sucks, I hate that bit. Like, that's like it's just a whole swath of like
I bought a new guitar, but I bought it in cash, so the wife doesn't know.
Hey! Wagga wagga. So I like, for instance, I work in a small group of 6 individuals. It's usually only 5 people. We're predominantly male, and it's a hot, sweaty, blue collar, getting your ass kicked every day kind of job.
You guys should make a calendar, man.
Yeah,
I'd look at that. Hot and sweaty.
Yeah. Woo. You don't want to know. Anyway, the point is, when you spend more time with the people at work than you do with the people in the rest of your life. It's just sort of the way that it works. Yeah. And when you're with these other people all this time, you can see these little intricacies of how they perform their version of masculinity and how they treat other people based on that, and the lies they've been sold and all these other things. And it leads you to, like, there's one particular person that we work with that gets picked on more than everybody else. And I participate in that, and I think about it a lot because it's not meant to be punching down, but then it quickly turns into punching down.
Yeah.
And it's like a way of a group of people affirming our masculinity through suppressing another person.
Oh, I know. I worked in construction, so I've seen the brunt of it. Yeah. I mean, in that you see what could be perceived as toxic masculinity on kind of full display. I mean, like
it absolutely is.
Like a guy I work with, I remember one time he was kind of pissed because something we were working on got fucked up. But he was really angry, and so he took a hammer right next to me, and he started wildly swinging that hammer, smashing something to pieces. And one of those times, he went like a couple inches away from my face with that hammer, and I was just like, "Wow, this guy's got to chill, dude." And there was all kinds of energy flowing around. It was pretty dangerous just being around all the time because everyone was just under really high tension, right? Because you're fucking tired as shit. What you're doing is dangerous and it's painful oftentimes, and that makes you pretty volatile sometimes. Yep. And of course, there's just the culture of just anytime you walk by anyone, you got to make a joke about fucking their mom, man. And if you don't, you're a loser and or something.
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily go that deep, but that's absolutely like your mom is like the joke. I've been on both sides of that. I've been the guy be like, whoa, this person's way too much, but I've also thrown a hammer through a window at work because I hit my hand.
Because you got that same energy, man. You know, I mean, and it comes out of you, and sometimes you don't know how to deal with it, and it's a really high stress environment. When you step on a fucking nail, man, and it goes through your foot. I mean, the kind of feelings that go through you in that moment is intense.
I don't step on many nails, but we have like metal shavings everywhere on the floor, and you go down on, to do something on the ground, and you have to kneel. Yeah. And the moment you do, it rifles up into your knee, and there's just no way to have good feelings in that moment. But it's precisely that. The way that you express yourself in that moment is where my issue with like myself and the way I think about things is, because it's like, I was hammering something and I missed and I hit my finger and it pinched in between the thing I was hammering and it made my fingers, and I was just expletives, and I whipped the hammer and it went through the window, and nobody gave me any crap for it. They just, like, the next day or whatever, a couple days, they came and fixed the window, and nobody was like, you shouldn't have done that. It was just, hey, I've been pretty pissed off before too. And it's like, So I feel this type of way, like it felt like a boys will be boys kind of thing. Like, well, you're a guy, you got mad and you threw something. It requires
restraint. That's the thing. And both men and women require restraints, and you have to restrain your worst impulses, or whatever. I'm not gonna say worse, but say if you have a natural urge to do something that is unproductive. And this is really a great foundation of Stoicism that people don't get into is, yes, it's about controlling your emotions, but not about having no emotions or not confronting them. It's really about being radically vulnerable to your emotions and confronting them all the time and being honest about them, and not allowing them to build up inside your head until you fucking shoot up a school or something, I mean, because if everyone was honest with their emotions, it would be much less likely for them to explode like they often do.
Yes.
But it's all about restraint, and restraint is where you are defined. It's what you don't do. Like, say people might judge a person for being, for being slutty or something like that. Maybe they had sex with too many people, right? What they're talking about is that they didn't have, say, restraint, right? They didn't have the ability to stop themselves from doing that. And that's something people have been judged for different times, because the idea is that you should not indulge yourself in all the pleasures of your time, because that's an indulgence, that's a mark of an unrestrained, excessive person. You're supposed to curtail that in some way, right? As an idea of restraint. In the same way as violence, everything requires restraint. If you allow yourself to indulge in every single impulsive feeling, you're going to die, or everyone around you is going to be, you're going to kill someone, or you're going to kill yourself. I mean, you have to restrain yourself in some ways. And if restraining yourself means not throwing a hammer around, I mean, maybe you have to have that foresight to say, what is going to be the consequence of what I'm doing right now? Like, that guy could have fucking put a hammer through my head, if he had not been just that careful, and he wasn't thinking about that though, because he was like, fuck everything.
And the throes of emotion.
Yeah.
It's difficult when you're in those situations to stop and be like, what are the consequences? Like you
don't think about
it's a split second of me. And it was just out of my hand already.
Yeah.
That doesn't excuse anything, and I'm still to this day ashamed of that when I look at the window and you can see that it's been, adjusted, and then I have to look at it every day. And nobody else talks about it. Nobody brings it up. Like, oh, you remember that time? Like, nobody gives me that crap, but I think about it every day.
Yeah,
it's a reminder to not be that guy, to have restraint, and it's not just restraint. It's also, again, I come back to the squishy word empathy. It's understanding that the way that you perform your own version of masculinity or femininity or whatever it is, how that affects the people around you. Like, okay, I'm going to make this joke about this person, but is it in good taste? Like, it's not like when you hit your hand and you're mad and you just react and you do a thing. You have time to think about the thing that you're about to say. And it's a thing I spend a lot of time beating up on myself about, that when I'm you're in like a group of people and you're all like, messing with each other and saying shit. There's always one guy that, gets more of it than everybody else.
Yeah.
And when everyone's slinging stuff around, that guy's going to get hit more than everybody else.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about, like, that was a solid joke, but could I have, held that back? It's the combination of restraint and empathy. Like, was that necessary?
Because you get this urge, this crowd mentality. You want to please the crowd, and maybe at the expense of another person. And that can be you sometime. And it's ugly to do that. And I've done that in the past. I mean, like I try and be as empathetic of a person as possible, especially with pain and with shame. Because I feel those things so deeply in myself, and I absolutely feel their effects on other people. And so I'm very aware if someone in a group is feeling marginalized or dejected. I mean, it's something I'm distinctly aware of, and it makes me very uncomfortable. But, at the same time, I have done things like made fun of other people in a group because it was funny at the time, and I was just allowing, and I'd be like, oh, hey, you're laughing too, right, kind of thing. But in actuality, that may not be the case, and maybe outwardly they might be laughing, but maybe I might say something that inside they may not forget for a while, just like me. There's sometimes someone might say something that I think about for years and that it never occurred to them, but I internalized that, and
I'm
but
sorry I insulted that shirt you wore that one day, Benjineer. Cut that.
Cut that.
Yeah, that's the cut that button. That's.
But boy, I think that maturity is a knowledge of the externalities and consequences of your actions, and that can be also a heavy weight to leave upon yourself, because you get overwhelmed by those externalities. Because if you actually start to look at anything, try to look at something objectively, your brain will explode before you're able to view something in its entirety, because the complexity of the world is paralyzing, and
I think so. To continue on the masculinity or like the manhood thing, an important thing frequently talked about is isolation. I'm very much you can leave me by myself. I'm fine for, she'll go out for a weekend and be gone, and I'll have the house to myself or whatever. And it's easy to get into that. Well, it feels good to be by myself and do my own thing and not have to worry about anybody. But what I tend to lose sight of sometimes is that it's the people around me that are keeping me in check. You know what I mean? Like having a partner that I live with, somebody to not just bounce ideas off of or share a space with, but somebody who goes, yeah, that wasn't the way to handle that. And although in the moment you're like, I don't whatever, but in the long run, while you're building this thing, this homunculus, this flesh golem that you pilot, it's important to add those pieces in there, because it makes you a more thoughtful, more well-rounded person. And it's something that I'm trying to remember to actively seek out. I don't always succeed in that, clearly.
Clearly, look at this guy. He's a
like
mess.
I'm a mess. Absolutely, it's horrible. Cut that.
Okay, I'm gonna think.
No negative self-reflection here.
Yeah, absolutely not. Look, in a vacuum, I used to love being alone, but I think that in a vacuum, you can't really exert positive or negative energies, and so those energies are kind of just they build up inside you, and I think you need the reflection of yourself and other people to really define who you are. And kind of like in the Jungian concepts of the encounter of the stranger, like think of like, are you really a good person if you just don't do anything at all, or if you don't have the capability of doing anything bad? I think you're a good person if you are capable of doing bad things to people, but you choose not to. But if you aren't, if you're just kind of a milquetoast, if you don't do anything, if you are just like powerless to do anything bad, but you just don't, that doesn't make you a good person. You're just an apathetic person, and maybe a pathetic person.
Apathetic person?
Apathy is death.
You just hit on Carl Jung there. I was actually going to make a little connection to the initial conversation of video games as art. I'm going to be a nerd and bring up Persona for a second.
I don't know much about it to preface this, but go ahead.
Okay, so the way it relates to what we were just talking about, to me, is, yes, this is a little lame that my way my brain works is heavily influenced by the video games I've played, but I guess it's like anybody in any media that they consumed in their childhood. I learned some things about the importance of community and like human to human bonds. Like I've always been, since I was young, been the type of person that's totally comfortable to shut the door, being alone by myself, doing my own thing. But something like Persona, when they use these they gamify it, sure, and they give you these social links and you talk to these people and you hang out with them and you get some sort of value to extract from it, which is a little kind of its own thing we could get into later. But having like the whole crux is that this person becomes a hero because of the bonds they form.
Yeah.
Like they almost always give you some sort of antagonist or mirror that has the same power set as you and might even feel the same way as you, but they never formed any of those bonds. They gain the same power, but isolated themselves. And you get to see the difference in what these like the pathologies of this are, like where your ideologies take you if you have you create your own echo chamber around your own head versus meeting a disparate group of people with all these different takes and all these different ways to live life. And that at the end of the game is ultimately what allows you to win the day, is that you're on your back foot, you're this close to being done, but it's the bonds that you formed over the past, calendar year.
Yeah, I
the
love
people
that.
looking up and, it's anime as hell, and they look up and they basically give you spirit bomb energies half the time, but it's metaphorical. It's you gain strength through the bonds that you form, and no one can win in isolation. And that I've experienced it enough times to go, yeah, maybe that's not the way I want to be, because the people who isolate themselves are tweaking out and they're killing people. And I mean, when you see school shooters, to bring that up, that is one of the contributing factors. Like, they might have been brilliant, they might have been talented, they had all this stuff possibly going for them, but they spent time in a dark room by themselves, just eating their own thoughts. And that's
I've been there. Yeah. And I've been to that point where it almost, to be honest, it almost became dangerous at times. My isolation just built up exponentially in my head for years, and I had some really terrible dark thoughts, and imagining a person who has been constantly dejected, bullied, just marginalized throughout their life, and then they don't have a support network of people who care about them, can see these emotions building inside them, and then a system that kind of marginalizes them and tells them that they're evil just because of who they are, etc. I mean, all this stuff can, and then add potential mental health issues into the mix. I mean, like it's a very dangerous concoction, and so of course we've been seeing a lot more of that recently. I mean, the way we live is unnatural, and so certain people are going to be led to certain awful things, and it's a scary place we live in these days. Yeah.
The society that we have kind of made for ourselves is what causes these mental illnesses in the first place half the time, and then it exacerbates the symptoms of these things, because we tell guys that they're supposed to be a certain way, and then when they're just living life, they don't get the things that they were promised, and then they start spiraling. And when they go to look for help, they find things like Jordan Peterson
or medication on the other end,
or alcohol or drugs, or promiscuity, whatever it is. And promiscuity by itself is fine, because if all parties are consenting and no one is hurt and it's all above board, then cool. But a lot of people, it's an addictive thing for them, and they fall, not a lot of people, but for some people, they fall into it, and they use it to replace every other thing that they should be doing. In my day-to-day life, I'm trying to, there's a vision of myself I see, whatever my version of masculinity is. And
got abs.
No, there's actually no abs. I'm still pale.
Is there oil
I'm still
involved?
Shiny. No oil.
Shiny?
Yeah,
But
I'm a
no
little
oil?
like I reflect a lot. I'm sure this is playing havoc on the video.
Nice tan?
No tan. I'm pale and proud.
Yeah, the white balance is going to be all off now, man.
That was a point I was originally going to make, is like every time, like I work in pants and like it's a whole thing, but whenever I come in or I have to change because I'm going somewhere after work and I change into shorts, people are like, oh, gee, fuck, no, but no, go get a tan. I'm like, no.
I remember when I used to have holes in my jeans, and my mom, she was, because I had a hole right here, and she saw it, and she was like, I said, there's holes, you can see my skin there, and she's like, no, you're wearing underwear, right? White underwear. And I was like, no, that's my skin. She was
my
like,
thighs.
Oh, you look like a beluga whale. My mom actually called me a beluga whale one time.
I'm sure that did wonders for your self-esteem.
As you can see.
Yeah.
It made me the man I am today. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. So there's stuff like that where we, again, police each other and make these comments that try to, like, well, I feel like a real man would be tan. What? Where did that come from? I don't know what that is, but for me, trying to use, I'm going to keep saying the squishy word, empathy, just trying to think about what the other person's feeling when I say or do something. I'm trying to make a conscious effort to maybe not necessarily compliment, but to affirm other people a little bit more.
Yeah.
Especially like the people that like when you are interacting with, like I'm currently basically training at work. I'm training somebody and they're fairly new, and I feel like it's important to remind them that like what you learn when you're raising children is to reward the good things instead of focusing on and punishing the bad things. So like, oh, you fucked that. Like instead of that, it's like you did good with that. Like
give him a little treat.
Yeah,
say sit.
Yeah, I give him
Roll
a little
over.
biscuit, and
Good boy.
yeah, we're all the same short size. They call us the hobbits because we're all that, and we all need step stools to get to everything.
They don't call me a hobbit, Zach. They especially don't when they look at my feet. That's not a thing.
Let's see them. Come on, pull the puppies out.
Are we doing a foot reveal
Yeah,
on this podcast?
A little Gollum
Oh,
action.
shit.
Process. My process.
My dogs are barking, everybody.
Yeah. Oh,
Big
you
reveal.
can just zoom that in and post.
Let me
and
stretch
just,
that thing.
Wow,
This
I can
is
smell
free
it. You should
foot
be
content, guys.
I don't have very good olfactory sense, but wow, that is. It's like walking into an Arby's.
You smell buttered popcorn in here, man? No. All right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's great.
Bit over. Oh yeah, don't touch that button. That's his foot button.
Don't touch that dial, man. All right.
That's basically it. Is getting over yourself and getting over the things that you've been taught that are toxic and not helpful. Is affirming other people without being like, bro, gains. It's more like we're doing good. We're surviving.
Self-improvements, man.
Self-improvements.
You should never, ever fail in self-improvements. You know, I mean, you should never, ever accept yourself. There's caveats to this, people, but I don't think that you should ever accept yourself entirely for who you are. You know, warts and all. I think that you should always endeavor to be the best person you can be. You know, I mean, obviously accept the things you can't change, but if there's something about yourself that is, you know, destructive or deficient, work on that. You know, be the best, and don't just say, yeah, I'm a, you know, boys will be boys. You know, I mean, if you find something that's not working, fix it. You know,
I think the initial problem is that some people don't realize that things aren't working. I'm actually very distracted by your bare foot.
With this one?
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Let's put that in the Benny's Big Talk After Dark.
The point is, all right, men are evil, and their masculinity should be crushed like a bug, put to the dustbin of history.
Girls
while
rule,
women
men
rule
drool.
the world. All right, these are the conclusions that we come to.
We should. Final hot take.
Yeah.
No one should have genitals. Everyone should be born completely flat, and you should have to go to a 4-year course to earn your genitals.
Okay, Ken.
when you're an adult.
I mean, my genitals haven't really done anything good for me, I'll be honest.
Nor anybody, for that matter.
I think everybody else gets some joy out of them, I think, you know?
Out of your genitals.
Yeah. Certainly more than I have. You know, but...
To get that one on camera, get that zoomed in.
Yeah, my genitals. You ever played the game Genital Jousting on Steam? It's just a bunch of dicks playing golf or something, and they stretch. You had to be there.
They elongate.
Yeah, they erect at times.
Doesn't that make it harder to joust?
It does
'Cause if
make it
you're, like,
harder.
up
That's
at
the
an
whole
angle.
point.
Well, maybe you're not one of those people and you curve to the left or something. But
Well,
I feel like
it's called jousting, but they just play golf. It's a bit of a misnomer. But
a bit that is entirely a misnomer.
I'm sorry, I would have preferred jousting as well as a medieval fan.
Yeah, why wouldn't it
I
just be
prefer
dicks
jousting.
on like top of other dick horses jousting each other?
Like, well, maybe the balls of the horse, and they. But what happens if they? Do they come and they see who like just showers the first? Like,
No, they just charge at each other.
so there's no coming involved.
There will be. Whoever wins tends
Gets to come.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. Because they stroke off each other and they're like,
Yes, and you know, like confetti at the end of a thing, and it's like, pow, but instead it's that.
Oh. So the dicks, they ride on swans in their jousting.
Why swans?
They got long necks, man.
That's one of us.
You wanna try this out after the podcast?
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
Instead of the jam, we're gonna have a different kind of jam.
Oh my god, I forgot about the jam. We're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
fucking jam, man.
We got a jam.
We're gonna genitally joust.
I'm gonna show these people my 3 collective hours of instrument use.
Yeah, for your knowledge, everyone, this man does not know how to
I
play
don't
musical
know how to
instruments, but he's gonna jam anyways.
I'm gonna.
That's the
I love the
magic.
feeling. This is collaboration with another person is part of a positive masculine experience. You can channel your anger and your idle hands into making art with someone else, and I think that's beautiful.
No homo. All right.
Fuck that, full homo. Full on homo.
Well, we already established we're going to genitally joust Zach,
Yeah.
all right? Point is, we're going to prove that anyone can jam, even Zach.
Especially Zach.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Engineer.
Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And I think we're going to jam at this point.
Yeah.
Let's fucking jam,
Let's
bro.
get it. Enjoy the sounds.
They won't.